Hello again. Today we're playing some more Kenshi, but with a twist. Today we're not playing as people, instead we're playing as crabs. So what exactly is a crab? Well, who knows? But what science does tell us is that for some reason, everything keeps evolving into them. So to achieve peak performance, I've decided to cut right to the chase and accept my genetic inevitability. Welcome to Crabtown, home of the Crab Raiders, as well as being home to my army of 250 crabs, along with their leader, Gilbert. But who is Gilbert, and how did he amass so many crabs? Well, Gilbert is a 37-year-old alcoholic divorcee who has a vendetta against the man who stole his wife, Bugmaster. Unfortunately for Gilbert, Bugmaster is surrounded by his legions of bug soldiers, who patrol not only Bugmaster's base, but the miles of land surrounding it. Definitely not a place for one man alone, which is why Gilbert, armed with the unshakable logic that crabs are better than bugs, has tamed, bred, and raised an army of loyal crab followers. So let's jump straight in and get started on our quest. After grabbing a few basic supplies from the bar, I sent Gilbert and his crab army out of the town and down to the coast, where I thought we might be able to safely enter the water and swim round to Bugmaster's territory. But we quickly ran into some raiders, who kept ambushing us and knocking us out. And when we tried running away from them into the ocean, we quickly found out that the water was very acidic. Barely surviving and with nothing achieved but a great deal of shame, we travelled back up to Crabtown and instead took a route inland, where we had a quick fight with some fish people before heading down into the valleys. A couple of small fights later, and I realised that rushing my enemies with all of my crabs meant that I was putting a ton of them into the swing range of my enemies' attacks. So, in order to minimise how many of my crab friends were hit and also decrease the amount of healing I had to do, I instead sent only a few of my crabs in at a time. Each time one got knocked out or killed, I would send in another. Luckily, I figured this out right before I ran into a group of very strong and very hostile crab raiders. Why they were hostile to us is anybody's guess. It may have had something to do with me sending Gilbert back into Crabtown to steal some supplies after we came back from the coast, but I suppose we'll never truly know. After churning through a couple waves of my crabs, we managed to down the crab raiders, before healing and continuing on to a small hill where we huddled up to a campfire and told some scary crab stories. The next morning started off on a high note, with us getting attacked by even more crab raiders. But since I didn't really want to deal with it, I sacrificed a few crabs to stay behind and aggro the bastards, while the rest escaped. Continuing on through the canyons, we were ambushed once again by yet more raiders, along with some samurais. On the upside though, Gilbert's stats were pretty low, so this gave me the perfect chance to train my combat skills ready for the big fight with Bugmaster. But no amount of training could prepare us for our next problem, terrain collision. While scuttling down a gap into the canyons, my crabs struggled to get through the narrow gap and spewed up onto the side of the cliffs. Normally I just send Gilbert in to pick up any stray crabs that get stuck between some terrain, but with nearly half of my army cemented into the rocks, I was left with only one crafty little trick up my sleeve. I sent Gilbert off to Flats Lagoon, but having gotten destroyed in the last fight, and with no medkits left to heal, the state of my limbs were continuing to worsen. But luckily, I managed to make it into Flats Lagoon, right before a pack of gorilla beasts could get to me. After healing up, I pulled a little gamer move by creating a new save and reloaded it with reset squad positions ticked. But something didn't feel right. Being this far from Crabtown meant my little orange friends would be viewed as some kind of exotic delicacy, and people were beginning to notice. We had gone straight from the frying pan into the fire, and before we even had a second to react, the townsfolk pounced on my army and began ripping them to shreds. was a bloodbath, but we counted our losses and escaped while we still could, before pressing on to the relative safety of Shem. The most direct route over to Bugmaster's territory from this point was through the swamp, and luckily the creatures there are so fucked up that in contrast, we looked relatively normal and could pass through without much trouble. So we continued on into the swamp and pressed on until we reached the capital, Sharp, where we stopped for the night to fuel Gilbert's alcoholism and rebuild morale after the vicious slaughter at Flats Lagoon. Now, on the best of days, Gilbert has the charismatic ability of a dried up kitchen sponge, but with about a gallon of various alcoholic beverages swirling around in his gut and weighing down his ability to form coherent sentences, it wasn't long before Gilbert managed to alienate himself from the other drinkers and start a fight. So once again, we were fleeing from yet another town, only this time with Gilbert drink driving behind the wheel of a Camaro SS he had stolen from a car park in Sharp. While Gilbert drew the heat, my crabs fled the town and entered the outskirts of Bugmaster's territory. And just as the sun rose on a new day, Gilbert joined back up with his minions, now only mildly drunk. But with the adrenaline from last night's fight still running high, we rushed across the spider plains and into Bugmaster's land. While the skin spiders were a threat, the main challenge was searching for Bugmaster's base as we navigated the messed up landscape. Eventually though, we managed to find Bugmaster's depressing little house and made our way up the hill to confront him. And as we arrived at the base of his house, we were attacked by a few skin spiders, but managed to pretty easily squash them. The skin spiders, however, weren't what was worrying me. Instead, I was far more worried about what Bugmaster had in store for us. Now, usually Bugmaster is pretty OP on his own, but what I haven't told you is that I may have downloaded a few mods to buff Bugmaster in order to pose a real challenge to Gilbert and his crab chums. So as soon as the next day began, I sent my elite crab force in to deal with Bugmaster. I easily managed to wipe out his small group of skin spiders and blood bugs, but as I snuck up to the second floor ready to ambush him, I clearly wasn't prepared for just how OP he was. And to make matters worse, Bugmaster was also able to eat the succulent flesh of my crabs to regain his health. In a panic to stop him before he could eat any more of my crab brothers and heal, I swarmed him with the next wave and realized just how screwed I was. But after a long struggle, finally my crabs downed him. And now, with Bugmaster posing absolutely no threat, I pathetically marched Gilbert in to have a final 1v1 with him. I made sure my crabs wouldn't attack and waited for Bugmaster to regain consciousness. But with only a few seconds of Bugmaster being back awake, he more or less instantly beat Gilbert and went off to brutalize some more of my crabs. Luckily though, with Bugmaster partially injured, my crabs knocked him out, and this time, not taking any chances, I ordered Gilbert to pick him up. And with my running speed now leveled to the point of being able to outrun a freight train, I sped off across the map over to the Skin Bandits' territory, where I delivered Bugmaster straight to their doorstep. Now that Bugmaster had been brutalized by a secret society of skeletons, I sent Gilbert over to Brink, where I spawned my crabs back in, grabbed some more alcohol, and sank a few shots while watching the sunrise on a new day. And with all loose ends now tied up, Gilbert was ready to put his marriage behind him and start his new life as a 37-year-old, socially inept, alcoholic bachelor, along with his army of 200 crab wingmen.